Hello, guys. You are tuning into Mahogany Honey's podcast. And today we have a special guest. We have Karina Silvestre. Karina Silvestre. She is
Oh,
our she is our health and wellness coach, and I'm happy to have her on board for our topic. I'm calling it Pan con Café, a mind and body wellness check-in, just because there's just so many exciting little things that we're gonna get, you know, culturally on topic of certain preventions and just certain things that like we encounter, just being a Latina woman and just trying to eat right and be healthy. So Karina, take it away, girl.
yeah. Thank you for allowing me to come in into your podcast. I really do appreciate it. So I'll just give, I guess, a little bit of a background on me. So I graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago with my bachelor's in kinesiology. So I studied that during my undergrad, but really my emphasis was on health promotion. So that was my concentration during my bachelor's degree. And for anyone who doesn't really know what kinesiology is, it's basically the study of exercise science and movement.
Mhm.
And during my undergraduate year, I really took an interest in psychology, exercise motivation, and I had really like great instructors who taught me what it takes to make an individual motivated. I think that was like my favorite class, exercise psychology. And during my undergraduate years, I pretty much really wanted an outlet that I could use to express myself and motivate others. And that's when I started my personal journey to creating my brand online. And slowly it has flourished into what I want it to be now, which covers all things that are related to health promotion in the Latinx community. And I've been able to basically apply all of the things I've learned from some of like the top researchers in the country and format that into a cohesive way that relates to the community.
I am so excited just because, like, with the pandemic and everything going on, we've all had like our challenges in trying to like eat healthy. And especially if like you're Latino, it's almost like added on pressure because it's like you have your grandmother who's like, don't eat out. And then you have like, uh, constantly like cooking at home and just like the challenge of like if you eat out you're gonna gain weight, but I'm like, yes I will, but if you keep feeding me every 2 seconds I'm gonna gain weight too.
Yeah, it's a struggle for so many because I think a lot of people have been trying to find a way to like strike the balance during the pandemic. And the important thing to remember is that like everyone's balance looks so different. It looks so different, especially like if prior to the pandemic you were always eating out, right? And now you're being told that you can limit how much you eat out. It's hard striking that balance. And then with like the cultural stuff that you were mentioning, like that impacts us as well because you know, I don't know if everyone else has the same experience, but like as a Latina, like my family is like so important to me. I like truly and honestly like that's like the most important thing to me, and I value their opinion a ton. And so if they don't feel comfortable with me doing something, chances are like I'm going to take that into regards, just like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many friends that like it's so every time we talk about like quarantining, the first thing that comes up is food. Like whoever you talk to about like right now in this
Mhm.
era, like they're you're like, how you doing? And you're like, I went out to eat yesterday, or I did like, and I'm like, okay, I need tips because um
Mhm.
at times when you're in a relationship, um you don't you get tired of like, either cooking or just like you don't know also like what the expense should be for like getting takeout. So you're over here
Mhm.
like, oh, how many times do I get takeout now and how many times do I cook at home? Who cooks, right? Then who like takes turn, and then that's just a whole nother thing. Like if
Yeah.
you want to go down that rabbit hole of like sharing the responsibility of cooking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's been going on, and like you've mentioned, there's like emotional eating that's tied to it as well. Like what I've noticed from like working with like plus over 300 individuals in health coaching, it's that like people are honestly getting so affected by COVID. Like people are just emotionally eating, and a lot of it has to do with just boredom, like being bored at the house, or maybe feeling sad. Those feelings can also like trigger emotional eating.
Absolutely. So, here, we want to explore cultural comfort foods, the root causes behind emotional overeating, and how it all circles back to operating in survival mode. Furthermore, we dive into beauty perceptions of natural beauty versus external enhancements in the marginalized communities. I'm so excited to get into that as well and bring forth an awareness of human trafficking
Mhm.
across the marginalized spectrum in urban cities. So we're not only just going to talk about food, we're also going to do, the whole body wellness, which I'm excited about. And so you gave us a little bit of your background. I'm so excited to hear that, like, your experiences and your professionalism that you've had so far. Has I want to ask, what has been your relationship with wellness and culture?
Yeah, so basically, like, I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up like in a neighborhood that was predominantly Hispanic, Latinx, and it wasn't like the best neighborhood. For me, it was normal like to grow up around violence and these. I didn't know at the time what it was, but I knew something was wrong because I would notice like all of these racial, socioeconomic disparities in Chicago. And
Mm,
while I wasn't fully aware of what it meant when I was 9, 10, I knew something was off. Eventually, when me and my family moved out of Chicago and we went and moved into the suburbs, I started really like opening up my eyes to like how closed off I was, right? And how closed off my community was. But then when I had turned 18, I actually started working in like a very like uppity upper mid class wealthy community, and that's when it actually hit me how different health was amongst like the three different classes in America. So I was able to instantly like spot the differences, and everyone's experience can look so different, but through my lens I realized how these more affluent communities had better accessible resources to healthier choices. Then
mm,
when COVID hit this year, that just really confirmed that what I had previously known was true. More Black and Brown communities are suffering and dying from COVID in the US. And even if like you go to the CDC website, you'll
mm.
find out, and the stats are right there. I mean, that was a catalyst that really urged me to take a push around creating more content that would help our community. And I think a lot of people are unfortunately closed off and don't notice these things because they only grow up with like one certain group of people, and that's all they ever know, and they don't know much above that. But like when you actually start hanging out with people from different backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds, you realize how all of that impacts your health. And like I told you, like for me, my upbringing was like growing up in a bad neighborhood and then moving to the suburbs, and then from moving to the suburbs and working in a really nice neighborhood. And that's when it really all hit me. So yeah, I mean, it takes a while to notice how wellness and culture are connected, especially if you're closed off and only know so much. But once you start opening up your eyes to everything, like it all clicks in your head and it all makes sense.
Yeah. One thing I do want to highlight, just because for some communities, especially like immigrants who are like first coming onto this country, and at times, you are seeking social services or just any type of like transitional assistance, right? For example, like EBT or just of that. Um, you also have a decision as to like what you do buy, and just being conscious about that, which I know that it's been highlighted in society in the past, but I also like to bring it into the forefront that even though you may have a budget, you can still work with that budget and still try to navigate and work with like healthy foods within your vicinity or your area. I know at times in urban cities it's a little bit more challenging because you got the bodegas, and like you don't have
Yeah.
that fresh food right up available. um
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time it might mean, hey, putting a little bit more legwork, physical activity, and walking down a little bit further or taking the train a little bit further, learning what is your priority, what are you prioritizing, does your health come first, does it matter, and what are you willing to do for it? So I wanted to
Yeah.
just like bring that, because at times like we have to at times work with what we have, and especially in these economically challenging times.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where I grew up, the nearest grocery store wasn't too far away. So I didn't necessarily grow up in like a food desert because those are totally real.
That's a real
I
thing.
didn't grow up in
Yeah.
one of them. Right. But I grew up in a neighborhood where, yeah, like I had to walk a little bit more to get to the grocery store, but we were kind of limited as far as like the vegetables that were accessible to us. And then once I moved to the nicer area that I'm in right now, I was able to realize how I had more access to healthy foods. But I do agree, though, like me and my family, we didn't have much growing up, but my parents, like for the most part, we ate pretty healthy. We ate really healthy. Yes, we were limited in a way, but my dad was always very health conscious.
Mm,
Even since he came, like before he came into this country, and like if anyone sees my dad looks really good for his age. For being his age, like over 50, he looks so good. And I always tell people that the secret to it is like how much he takes care of himself.
mm-hmm.
Like that man is like the equivalent of like a self-care person. He is just like the best at it. And so I grew up with like these morals very early. And I have a lot of friends who are Latino, and they didn't have these morals instilled in them.
Mm.
And I know a lot of Latinos, they don't within our community. And I guess I kind of got lucky in a way because they got instilled in me very, very young.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that. I didn't think of that as well. My dad actually um, has there's a lineage of Crohn's disease, and so very early on, he was diagnosed with that. I want to say probably like in his mid 30s around that time,
Hmm.
and I just remember like opening the fridge and being like, why is there goat milk here? Ew. Or just being like, my mom having to cook with coconut oil and just being a little bit more mindful of his like dairy intake and just all these different things. And I, just like you, I didn't know that I was actually being put on because like these are
Hmm.
actually alternative methods to like some of the unhealthy choices. And he would go out of his way to go to Whole Foods and go and buy like these specific things just to like have a specific diet just for him. And low key, like you're right, there was just like a little trail there that we maybe subconsciously like we don't pick up on, that maybe someone in our family is like kind of like leading the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's good that you were able to see that from your dad because maybe at the time it doesn't make sense. But then, like, when you get older, you're like, oh, maybe I picked up this habit from like my dad or my mom. And like, one of the habits that my dad has is like when my dad gets stressed, he always resorted to like walking. Like, my dad walks a lot. I mean, I think he maybe walks like 5 miles per day, like, no joke.
That's good. That's
And he could walk, right now, he could walk more during the summer. But I grew up seeing that. So whenever I'm stressed, I never get angry at anyone. I never get furious. Yeah, sometimes I'll get a little bit pissed off, but I usually just resort to walking, and I'm a huge walker and I'm always walking. Like, if someone told me right now, I need you to walk 10 miles, I would do it. And that's really helped me during the pandemic. But all of these things are affected by our culture, by our family upbringings, because even though maybe our culture is inclined to be a certain way, like
mm-hmm.
maybe your family didn't raise you that way, right? There's a lot
Right.
of Latinos who feel a little bit like they can't identify with the Latinx Hispanic community because maybe they feel like their habits
Mm-hmm.
aren't the same as typical, right, Latinas. And so when I started my Instagram, that was the reason why I had my name be that, my brand name, Atypical Latina, because I really wanted people to take a second to look at my stuff and be like, wow, she's like really challenging like what someone would think a typical Latina is. And the word atypical is unorthodox. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to challenge all of these things on my Instagram. And yeah, I mean, this all just goes in a circle, but sometimes it's up to us to like break free from that circle that people want us to be in.
Absolutely. So now to getting a little bit nitty gritty with it, what are some examples of challenges when you try to shift to cultural, your cultural health and like change your food or your lifestyle and etc.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. So cultural health is gonna look different for everyone. And when we talk specifically like about the Latinx community,
Mm-hmm.
some of the biggest barriers I notice is sometimes just like the unwillingness for some members of the community to want to become healthy because it's like a quote unquote like rich people thing. Like I can't even like begin to express the amount of times like I've heard people say that they can't get healthy because it's a white people thing. And
Mm,
I think if we continue to honestly have this mentality, and I don't know the history behind it, but I do know that it's not healthy. I actually made a post about this, I think earlier this week or last week. And I posted the same quote, like, don't shame on Latinas who decide to get healthy and stop calling it like a white people thing. And one of the responses I got was someone said that the reason why our culture sees it as that way was because at one point in history it was just like a white people thing, and so they're so instilled with that in their mind that it's only accessible to white people.
mm,
So it's just instilled in them, and it's just a cultural thing that has trickled down from history. So I couldn't really chime in on that because I don't know much about it, unfortunately. But I was like, well, that would make sense, right? But unfortunately, like we can't change the past. Like the past already happened. Like the only thing we can really do is like look forward
yeah.
and choose to be healthy, because now we can actually become healthy. Now we have the privilege of, at least here in America, of becoming healthy. We have choices accessible to us, but I do understand, like I said, food deserts are real, and sometimes it's harder for a certain group of people to become healthier because of the socioeconomic pressures that are put on us.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like we do need to shift from the mindset of having this problem in our head to actually finding the solution for it. Um, and cultural respect is so critical in reducing health disparities and improving access to like high quality healthcare. There's so many amazing people here in Chicago who are working towards this, who are like actually like the catalyst for change. And so when it comes to like cultural health, just the biggest problem I see is like the mindset that we have. But
Mm,
there is a history tied behind that mindset, and we have to find ways to break free from it.
yeah.
That way we can be liberated from this and introduce the solutions, which I don't see too many people wanting to do.
Yeah. I think for me, the awareness point of like, wow, I think I'm shifting like the way that my health is was when I moved to Miami. Miami has a culture of like, it's not enough to be skinny. You also have to be fit, right? Like that's the joke. Like not only
Yeah.
do you have to be like, but that's a social construct, and like obviously like everyone what has their own relationship with like what how they feel fitted that their body should look like. But for the most part, if you live there, it's part of the culture. You work out, you exercise, you do marathons, you go to the gym. Like your life somehow, some way revolves around working out or doing something.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, and I loved it because I was like, okay, like I get to be more physically active and it's nice outside. So you get to be out more and do more outdoor things and go to walk. You know, you take a walk or you just like go to the park or you just go kayaking. There's just so many activities that you can work with the climate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, and even the food too, like the food was great because just like so many variety, different Latin American foods, you know, all different Central American, South American, like
Mm-hmm.
foods that I have not tried before. And it was just like amazing. But however, like there was also like, I had to learn, okay, portion control. It's a thing. Like actually like being like, this is so like
Yeah.
so good. But at the same time, like you need to know like what's appropriate for your body and like and everybody's body is different and what the intake level of that can be. um another thing was
Mm-hmm.
going back to what you said about like, oh, it's a white thing. So I remember living in downtown, but also relatively living really close to a neighborhood called Brickell. And in Brickell, there's a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
high end gyms. Like for example, Equinox is there, and like X and Y gym is there. That
Mm-hmm.
usually you would see white Latinos or Latinos like coming out of, and I'm just like, somewhat intrigued, like, wow, there's like levels to working out. There's like levels and just like so many different
Mhm.
ways of like, and I liked it because I got to see that um Latinos and actually just diverse, a lot of different people from all over the world were just working out together. And because coming from Massachusetts and just seeing, this is a white people thing, doing yoga. Like I
Yeah.
would tell my mom I'm going to do yoga and she would look at me like, and I can't fault her because when I would get to my yoga class, no one looked like me in my yoga class. And it was
Yeah.
concerning because there's just so many beneficial factors of just doing yoga. Um, and even it's
Yeah.
funny because I have like my mom does yoga now in the morning, and I just got my grandma to do it. So it's like you can start your own generational, you know,
Y-
pattern.
yeah. Sometimes it's honestly just up to us to like start these patterns, because if we if we continue to just focus on the problem, right? I
Mm.
Just focusing on it, just pondering on it, just, complaining about it, and it's going to cloud our mind from like thinking about solutions. And sometimes the easiest solution is to like just start it in your household. So for me, for example, like I told you, I was raised eating pretty good for the most part. And so I always grew up liking seafood. I grew up eating a ton of vegetables. I grew up eating like a lot of vegetables and fruit. And as I got older and as I started seeing how other people would eat sometimes, I'd be like, "You don't eat any vegetables or any fruit?" And they'd be like, "No, do you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I thought that was like a normal thing for people to do." And apparently it's not, right? Because everyone's diet and lifestyle looks so different.
Yeah, yeah,
And but that started at home. And so I know, like, I don't have a family now, right? Besides my fiance, my family, but like when I have an actual and raise a family and children, like
yeah,
it's all going to start at home. Like it's going to be all about eating, having healthy, sustainable habits,
yeah,
because in the long run, like this cuts down on like chronic diseases from occurring, and this helps prevent chronic diseases. Sure, they may still happen, but it still is a stepping stone in the right direction.
yeah. So let's have a little fun with this. I'm gonna share with you what a day in my life of eating looks like,
Okay.
just to give the listeners an idea of like how it has shifted and changed a little bit in my life, and work
Mhm.
from it from there. Okay, so in the morning,
Mhm.
culturally in my household, a pan con café is considered breakfast. That could be considered breakfast.
Yeah.
Also, we're Dominican, so like we love mango, right? I'm not
Mhm.
sure if you ever tried it, but you're more than welcome anytime you're in Massachusetts. Come on down, girl. We'll make you some
Mhm.
mango with salami y huevo. Okay? So we call that los tres golpes y una cebollita con una cebollita. So we like, my grandma goes ham. That could be like a considered breakfast, right?
Yeah.
House. Then you move on and then you have lunch, right?
Mhm.
Lunch could be rice, beans, and chicken with a salad on the side, right? With a
Yeah.
salad on the side. Um, and then dinner can be what you had for lunch if there's leftovers, right?
Yeah.
Which you would be eating rice again, right? You'd be eating rice again.
Mhm.
And aside from that, you could either make your own food. Like now I like to make myself like either a salad, and I try to cut back on any carbs. Like I try to keep it a like low carb towards like dinner. That's just like,
Mhm.
so I when decided to start doing a shift, I tried fasting and I tried keto, right?
Mhm.
This is where I was like, okay, Alexa, like let's see what you can reset in your life. Like let's start with your food. Man, I don't know if you've ever had like a reaction when you start dieting, how everybody comes out of the woodwork and tries to tell you, like, this is how you should diet. Have you tried doing this? Oh, you're doing it wrong. Like, actually, like, that's actually sugar because I was trying to cut out sugar and carbs. And like, I didn't know that, like, for example, fruit can be considered like a sugar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, what am I supposed to eat? So, like, also being mindful of when you go on these diets and just going easy on yourself and having like self-compassion, because like everyone's journey looks different, and your inner critic, you don't know how loud that can get and how like emotional and mentally harmful at times that can actually
Yeah.
be or get.
Yeah.
Yeah. um
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, with people, when I work with people, I always tell them, like, make it a lifestyle. Try to focus on your journey becoming a marathon, not a sprint. Because you're right, there is so much information. We're in the information age. There's so much information accessible. Someone might tell you something, and someone might tell you something else, and someone might tell you this and that. There's a lot, because realistically, there's many different diets that we can live and that we can lead to. And sometimes when we're starting this, like how you said in your journey, when we're starting these diets, our body's just not used to it, and we decide to just make like a whole 360 shift. Like, it goes from like
yeah.
eating all of these yummy, delicious Dominican foods one day, and then you just decide to completely cut them out. You decide to go all or nothing on it, and that's gonna obviously have a big impact on how you feel and how you look as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not sustainable for the long run, because Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And so it takes a lot to lead up to these habits and to create like sustainable healthy behaviors. And so I always tell people, when they get into a diet mentality, not that I'm anti-diet, but I look at it more as of a lifestyle. And everyone's body's so different. There's some people who honestly, like, they do really well on low carb. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with weight, nothing correlated with weight, with how they look. It's just how they feel. Like, they have more energy, they do better. There's people who do horrible with low carb. they,
Yeah.
they can't do it. They feel sluggish, they don't have that energy anymore. There's people who do really well with a super, super high protein diet, and a lot of these people are athletes. And then there's like an average Joe who, like, they can't have more than like a certain threshold of protein because it might just hurt their stomach. So everyone's body is so different. And so even though you might hear like in the media, like, try this diet, try this, try that, like, it might not work for you, because your body just may not react well to what you're eating. And so it takes a while to figure these things out. It takes a while to figure out like what works for you, what's sustainable for you, what's good for you, and like your routine. And so, yeah, I hear you out. It is tough. It really is tough.
Yeah. And how do you define emotional eating? Because I feel like everyone has like their own.
Yeah, emotional eating, the way I look at it is like from like a clinical perspective. So it's basically defined as like when you're eating not because you're hungry, but
Okay.
because it's triggered by an emotion, right? And so when people think about emotional eating, they it may be associated with being bad, right? Like people being bored, people being sad, depressed, anxious, and that's why they lean towards food. But what a lot of people don't realize is that like emotional eating could also be like celebrating because you're happy and you just choose to go out to eat because that's a way to celebrate. It could be like you're with your family and you're not necessarily hungry, but they made some delicious food and you want to appreciate them. So that feeling of wanting to appreciate them comes up in emotional eating.
Mm.
So there's a difference between like having physical hunger, like actually being hungry, and having emotional hunger. And the way that people can kind of figure out if they have physical or emotional hunger is that they can just grab like a notepad or something and just carry it without you throughout the day. And like every time you notice you're hungry, like write down if you notice if there's an emotion attached to it. So like let's say like right now it's about to be noon, right? And I had just told you that I'm hungry during our break.
Yeah.
So I'm actually hungry. Like I can feel it in my stomach. I'm getting the physical symptoms of it. Like my mouth is salivating right now.
Wow.
That's how you know when you're actually physically hungry, because your mouth will salivate. I have extra saliva right now in my mouth. And right? And so as opposed to like let's say I said I'm hungry, but I realize that maybe I'm just hungry because I'm bored or because I'm upset at something that's going on through my day. Like I can write that in the journal, like I'm just hungry because like I just need comfort because I'm sad or upset.
Mm.
And so those are some ways that people can realize whether or not they're doing emotional eating, because sometimes it's hard for people. I work with a ton of people who don't know. like they're like, I don't know. I've never really thought about that question. And but once they start writing it down, they're like, oh yeah, I realized it was like boredom eating. And in the Latinx community, I can definitely say from my experience, a lot of my emotional eating has been tied to like celebrating with my family, or like wanting to just show my family that I appreciate them by eating the food that they make. So I
Mm-hmm.
may not be hungry, but family is a huge value to us within our community. So it always kind of feels like a responsibility for me to eat what they make, because I just want to show them that I love them. It's a form of love for them.
Yes. Um, it took a minute for me to kind of just have that conversation with my mom because I feel like she was getting offended to some point when I really started like getting heavy on my fasting and diet. And she was like, "You don't eat anything. I'm not cooking anymore." And I'm just like, "Okay, like I appreciate the food that you make. However, I'm on a journey right now. It doesn't mean that I necessarily don't like your food or don't appreciate it." So, another thing that I want to let my listeners know, like, please don't feel like in order for you, one of the feelings that you may be confronted with is probably guilt. You know, that's a normal feeling. But also know that like the people who genuinely love you will understand like later on, hopefully down the
Yeah.
line of like what you're doing just to like
Yeah.
better your own health because everybody's body's different even though um you know your family uh may have eaten this and they think that this is like it's a belief thing like this is how we should eat. Maybe your body's different, like you're a whole different person from like your parents or from like your siblings. And so everybody is unique in that sense. And whatever you might, we all know this, like we all have different dislikes and likes, like, and that's just like another thing, food included and diet.
Yeah. So sometimes our family can play as peer pressure, like you mentioned. Um, Sometimes that's, like I said, that's their form of love. And so I know it's very common in Latino households to like your mom getting offended or your aunt if you choose to not eat. And for a very long while, I was actually vegetarian. And my family would be like, they would not understand it. They'd be like, why don't you eat meat? And and they'd be like, why don't you like eat some carne? And I'd be like, I just don't want to. I just don't want to. And it's just, I always kind of felt interrogated by my family because I don't ever usually feel the need to explain myself to them. But sometimes you just have to tell them, like, I just don't eat meat. I'm gonna choose to not eat meat. Like, I appreciate you, like, wanting me to have some of your delicious food, but like, it doesn't align with me. And your parents or your family or friends may be thrown off by it. They may be like, whoa. But like, once you set that boundary, they're
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna have it instilled in their mind and not ask you again. And if they continue asking you again, like, you have to continue addressing it until it eventually sticks.
Yeah.
But for the older generation, like when we're working with like our abuelos and our abuelas, like maybe they just forget. Honestly, they can just simply forget, because my grandma forgets all the time about what I can and what I can't eat. And this
Yeah.
is just from like some allergies that I have, and so it's different for everyone. But you have to continuously let them know, because that'll make it easier in the long run for them to like step back a little bit and be like, oh yeah, I do remember her telling me this, and she did set her boundaries, and so I'm not going to ask her.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that I love that you mentioned boundaries because maybe your first step to changing your lifestyle is how you practice doing it with food.
Yeah. And that's hard for so many people, because food brings people together. Like, food is enjoyable, food is an activity, food is tied to so many things. And it is hard for people to set boundaries because we connect through food a lot of the times. But like you said, the best way sometimes to get discipline is through doing it with the things that you can do, and food is one of them, and how you choose to eat.
I know because I love food so much, so that's why.
Oh girl, same here.
And then I do want to know, like, what are some root causes of unhealthy relationship with food, and how is this related to operating maybe from survival mode and us not even knowing it?
Some root causes. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of what the media pushes on us. I think there's a ton of social pressures that are out there, and there's a lot of dynamics that play into it with the media. And that's, hopefully we get into that too. But a lot of this affects us. And so when like an example would be like in the 90s, the milk industry, the dairy industry was really, really pushing for us to drink dairy all the
Hmm.
time.
I remember that.
Like it was everywhere. I mean, like, you remember. And so because of that, like we thought that milk was good. And now there's studies that are coming out that milk is actually not that good for you. And at one point, early on in history, not early on, but I think like in the 1950s, don't quote me on that, I could be wrong, but like doctors were pushing for people to like smoke cigarettes because it was a really great stress reliever. And it is for some people. And so for such a long time, these baby boomers honestly thought that smoking cigarettes was so good for them. And then as the studies came out, we realized that smoking actually isn't good for you, right? It's harmful to you.
Yeah.
And
Surprise.
there's all of this information, and people sometimes listen to everything and they believe it's true, and sometimes it's not true. Sometimes we don't know until years later.
Yeah.
And so I think the media plays a huge role in how we have our relationship with food. And then I think like in the 90s too, what was being promoted a lot was like a fat-free diet. It was like so promoted, like
Hmm.
anything that's fat-free is good. But now we know that fat is actually really good. There's like a huge there's like a huge thing around avocados. There's a huge thing around like having enough seeds. There's a huge thing around fats. So do you see like the media is going
Yeah.
to influence us to think that something's wrong for us because they may think it's wrong for us at the time, and then later on they realize it's right. And then if these ideas are instilled within our family, and that's what they are led to believe, like it's going to be instilled within the culture, and then it eventually trickles down to mindset, and then your mindset is so settled on it. There's a big craze around the keto diet, and it that really blew up. The keto blew up, that lifestyle blew up completely. And some people are realizing it's not too good for them, while other people are realizing that it is good for them. So
Hmm.
it's all, I think, like societal pressures for sure.
Yeah. And for me, I took it from when I speak on survival mode, I speak on when the stories that my mom would tell me or just like my family would tell me in regards to when there was hard times in their country, like in these
Yeah.
international countries at times, and they would be like, at times all we had was bread, you
Mm-hmm.
know and this is like why I love bread so much, and it's like that emotional component to it. It's like bread was always there for me. I love bread. It's all I had when there was nothing else. We had bread. And so there's a lot of studies that have like came out now that gluten, bread being a gluten, that
Yeah.
gluten at times like may not be that good for you. um and so I had to explain to her, because she would always tell me, like, I feel so bloated. I feel like this. I feel like that. And I'm like, hey, you might want to check in your gluten intake. 'Cause,
Yeah.
like, you're consuming a lot of rice and you're consuming a lot of bread. And at times you're complaining about it when you go to bed about like how your stomach feels. And I'm like, you might want to just like check the portion of the amount of like bread that you're probably intaking, or the amount of rice that you're intaking. Um, because that might have something to do with it. However, I'm not like a food
Yeah.
expert or etc. But for me personally, and from the research I've done, that's like maybe a thing that you might want to consider, right? Um, and same thing with coffee. Like that's another cultural component in of among the Latino community is like cafe. And I
Yeah.
remember living in Miami, there's coladas. So Cubans make this like strong ass espresso coffee called a
Mm-hmm.
colada. And it's a joke because when I used to work in an office setting. Come 12, 3 o'clock, you would see like everyone like going around with like little cups of like coladas, like, yo, you want some colada? And it was just like that thing to keep you going. It was like that stimulant to keep you going. um But then you like, for me, I felt like all cracked out. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't, like I was like having an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
And I couldn't go to sleep at night. And I'm like, why can't I sleep? Oh, that colada I had like at 3 o'clock. And a lot of people think
Yeah.
that coffee is the solution to burnout. Coffee's not the
Yeah.
that coffee's gonna solve your burnout. I'm like, you might actually know that you might want to take a step back and reflect that you're wearing yourself out and you're kind of just using coffee as a distraction or an avoidant to push to keep you going.
Yeah.
Body's probably trying to signal
There.
that like you've reached your limit.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, our bodies are built so differently, and while like some people do really good on coffee, like other people don't. There's people who suffer from anxiety, and this triggers them, and it makes it much worse. And so that's why it's so important, like part of taking care of yourself is like making sure like you go to your doctor, you become educated on health, you become educated on what's a trend and what's a fad, you become educated on like what's actually in your food. There's so many components to it, and while it may seem like a lot, like we live in this age where anything is really accessible, to be honest, and if you do the right research,
Yeah.
you can get the right answers. And if you apply the stuff that you're learning, you may just figure out that it works for you or that it may not. But the only way we're going to figure it out is if we do the research. And so like for me, I see a therapist, and that's another component of health that many people don't do, and it's not done within our community. And like anytime you say like I'm seeing a therapist, people think you're crazy. Right? And but it's a really good component of health. And I would consider myself like a very chill person. I don't get easily angered. And a lot of people always ask me like, why am I not like freaking out? And I'm like, because I know it's going to get solved no matter what. And but the reason why I feel that way honestly has been because of therapy, because I know how to figure out and how to deal with my feelings, and I know how to not let them like overtake me, and I know how to not blow up.
Yeah.
And there's so many components of health that like we can talk about. And it's like a really interesting field.
Yeah, same here. I was trying to address that component of like mental health in my family, and tell them like, hey, there's something that maybe our family can benefit from, because I also am the first person who willingly decided that like, hey, I may want to go to therapy and like figure out myself a little bit more and find out more of like who I am and some of these things that like went on like in my life. And it's just like still that huge stigma of like only people who are that are not okay in their head go. And I'm like, that's, very old school mentality. That's a very old school mentality. And I try to sit down and like educate them and have these conversations around them. But at the same time, people also need to be ready to receive that information, because if they're not ready and they're still like being fixated or just at times want to be ignorant about something, then you got to just like accept it and not like exasperate yourself and trying to like explain to somebody like your decision and your path of like to wellness.
Yeah, people, it's very normal for people to have resistance and to resist, right? Like there's so many there's a really good model, and it's called like, what is it called? The like it's a motivational model, and it talks about like how people get motivated. Or it's called the stages of change. That's what I meant to say. It's called the stages of change. And so in this model, it talks about like the stages of change for people, and resistance is one of them. And sometimes people get stuck in resistance
Mm.
and they never change. And what may lead them to change is when it actually gets really, really bad. Like when they're
Mm.
suffering from heart disease, when they realize that they're not as mobile as they used to be, when it starts catching up on them, and then they're realizing, wow, like I resisted for so long, and now I actually have to change. And it's
Mm.
very sad, and it's unfortunate, but like you're right. Sometimes they have to realize it on their own, and there's only so much you can do, because you also have to take care of yourself, right? And then trying to take care of other people, like it's not going to work out, because we can only solve so much for others until we begin to like solve stuff for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's where we have to be mindful of like who's performing from their ego and who's genuinely trying to perform from like their soul. And this leads me into the question of like body perceptions and body shaming. And, since we're on the topic of food, of like, are we curvy or skinny enough, especially in the community among women and Latinos, according to the media?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the media controls us, and it's up to us to choose like how to react to that. The media has so much power, and it can really like influence us to completely have thought distortions. So like sometimes we have to honestly just silence out the media and listen to what we truly want. There was like a point in time where the media glamorized being super skinny, and now it's all about like having big butts, boobs, etc. So anyone who posts on social media, that's the media too. I'm the media.
Mm,
You know, you're the
yeah,
media. This we
yeah,
are forms of the media.
yeah.
And I have a decent following. So every time I put something out, I do think about how a person will perceive it from their lens. I'm very cautious about what I put out because I'm like, do I actually want to control the way a person thinks, or do I want them to have autonomy to think for themselves? And I was actually in a networking event the other day, like an online one,
Yeah.
and there was all of these content creators who have like over 1 million followers, and they were saying how that the best thing to do in order to grow online is to post controversial content that people might not really agree with because that's going to trend.
I heard
And
that.
that really spoke out to me because that means that sometimes people will just post stuff to stir the pot and bring in the
Mm,
buck. And it's unfortunate that sometimes like that's what's most important, like sex and money. And so I would advise for anyone to like limit the amount that they spend on the media and set time aside to be more intuitive and to be a critical thinker, because when you become more critical and you're able
critical
to step
thinker.
away, oh, like you're able to step away from the situation and like actually analyze what's going on, the dots are already clicking and you realize that like you can choose how to react. And as Latinas, I think it's so weird because the media tries to portray us as like being super curvy, being super this, super that, but some Latinos are not built that way, right? And so they can feel left out when they're not built that way. And then also in the media, like some Latinas may be portrayed as like being like super feisty, and it's like some Latinas aren't like that. They're not. And it's just they just want to control the narrative, and that's what it is about, like controlling people. Like this sense of control, people like this sense of having money, of sex, of sexualizing things, and it's becoming honestly too unhealthy in my opinion. And I would tell anyone who's feeling kind of like lost, where they're like, I don't know what I want my body to look like. On one side I want it to be like skinny, and I want to be this, but on the other side, like I want to build out my curves, but on the other side I want to be athletic. Like these are all thought distortions that you're having because you're probably being influenced by way too many people, more than you think. And so sometimes you just got to take a step back and be like, okay, what do I honestly want for myself? Like what do I truly want? What's going to make me feel the best, right?
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be about how you look, but about what's going to make you like feel good inside. And so I know for myself, like I'm a pretty tiny person, and if let's say I wanted to pack on more pounds to get like curvier, right? Because when I do pack on more pounds, like I have more weight in my legs. Um, I'm honestly I don't feel healthy that way. I don't feel good. I feel unenergized. I feel tired. I feel fatigued.
Yeah.
I just don't feel good. I'm not good at weighing 145 pounds. It has nothing to do with the way I look, but it more or so has to do with the way I feel. I feel
Yeah.
more comfortable being at like 125 because that's when I have energy. That's when I feel good inside. And so this is going to look so different for everyone, but the media impacts us, and it almost kind of wants to like shape and mold Latinas into a certain way that we're
Hmm.
not.
Yeah, and going back to the hypersexuality part, like there's a lot of that in our culture going on too. It's just like, the Sofia Vergara's, the J-Los, we love them. We all like appreciate them for like, the culture that they like bring in and they have represented. But again, that's not all of us. We don't
Yeah.
look like that. Um, And so we just have to like also be mindful of the hypersexuality that goes on. And also, a lot of the things that people don't talk about is the mental health component and the reasons as to like why some people may choose to do some augmentations or just like go towards that path, you know? Like a lot of people don't talk about like I am familiar with this because again, living in Miami and like basically like your money revolves around how you look and like, but at the
Yeah.
same time I also saw the other side of it, that people are behind the scenes battling personality disorders. They're battling some type
Mm-hmm.
of mental health disorder. Something is tied into their survival. Some people actually, you know, in order for them to make some type of income is dependent upon how they look. And so like a lot of, not saying that all of those are all reasons why people go ahead and proceed with doing that. However, that is a reality that is out there. So make sure that if you are making a decision to do some type of like reconstructive surgery or just trying to do like any type of cosmetic or just augmentation, just being mindful of like, why am I doing this and for who am I doing this, and like
Yeah.
just taking those, just take a minute, just reflect for a second, please. It's like all we ask. And in my culture, going back again, like, and in my family, the women in my family have resorted to those options. And there's a lot of pressure at times when you see like your family and the women in like that you've grown up with do this, and you're almost like, but I feel like I've always been an individual thinker and a critical thinker, so I'm always like, huh, that's great for you, but I don't know necessarily if that's for me. But thanks
Yeah.
for the suggestion. But thank you for the suggestion, though. I'll get there on my own time if I consider it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I sometimes people just have to like ask themselves, like, why do I really want to do this? Like, do I really want to, like, what's the actual reason behind it, right? And like, why do I actually want to do it? One of the conversations I was having last week with a friend was like around money, and she was like, I'm like, why do you want, like, not that there's anything wrong with it, because I always agree more money is better for our community. I'm like, why do you want,
Okay, your paper.
like, why do you actually want more money, and why are you constantly waking up having and feeling the pressure of needing this huge lump sum of money? And I told her, I was like, hey, like, if no one in the world knew how much money you had, no one in the world knew, you could never disclose that information to anyone. And let's say you had all of this money in the bank, and like, you just couldn't share with anyone, and you couldn't necessarily do much with it but hold it there and grow it. Would you still want that money? And she's like, no. And I'm
Mm,
like, so then why are you constantly putting the pressure on yourself every day, getting yourself so anxious about this? Because she's so
worked up.
anxious about it. And she was like, I just want people to know that I have money. And I'm like, yeah, there's a difference between having external motivation and internal motivation, right? So the difference between both of them is that when you're externally motivated to do something, you're doing it just to basically like feed into an external factor, right? Like, I want to get my boobs done because I want to look good for my husband. That's not necessarily coming from me. It's coming more from the part of wanting to comply to what he wants. That's an example of it. Not that that's true in my situation, but that's just an example of it. As opposed to saying like, I want to like get my boobs done because I I want to just look and feel good for myself, and I don't really care if guys like it or not. I just want to do it
Yeah.
for myself. So sometimes you just have to wonder and think like, is this external motivation or internal? And if you find out that it's external, you may want to dig a little bit deeper, as to maybe what's triggering this, what's the triggering factor. And I think a lot of women now are getting plastic surgery, and I'm all for encouraging women and men, not just
Right.
women, to do what they feel like is best for them, but to also kind of like take a step back and like critically think about the situation as a whole before like putting your bucks into something that you may not be too happy with at the end.
That part. That part right there. Because
Yeah.
you can't take it back once you've done it. So
Yeah, and I mean sometimes you can like I think with certain procedures you can like let's say you got your boobs done, you can technically go in under the knife and take them off again, but it may come up, it may come with health complications. There was like this big trend in the early 2000s of like women having bigger breasts, and a lot of those women got them done. And now what's trending on YouTube, there's like this whole community of women who got their breasts done in the early 2000s, and they're realizing it wasn't good for them, and it actually caused them depression, and now they're taking them off. There's like a huge community on YouTube and on Facebook that's promoting this.
wow.
And you see what I mean? Like at the moment it may seem good, but then you may look back years from now and be like, wow, like I actually didn't want that.
Yeah.
And you know what? I like I said, everyone is free to choose what they want to do with their body. But I guess the point that we're having in this conversation is like to like take a moment and reflect. And that's what should be important at the moment.
Absolutely. And it's all some of these augmentations and resorting into survival mode and like I have to look a certain way to survive are at times tied into international human traffic going on in especially in urban cities. You see this mostly in major cities, either in LA, New York, Miami. Um, I'm not sure what Chicago may look like because I haven't visited there. Um,
Yeah.
but there's a wherever you can see a large amount of like diversity, or just like what you would consider maybe possibly like a melting pot, or where international uh, money is coming in, or just foreign exchange is coming in. Um, those are the cities that definitely, because sex sells at the end, like I hate to say it, but sex sells, and that's where like a lot of this is like rooted in, and it starts stemming from. And I just try to be very careful and trying to just like have like all types of listeners, I hope, like from whatever age range to what. But working in social services, I just remember like some of the girls early on trying to get out of foster care early, or trying to just like find their own way out. And that's how they saw their way out, was by like, okay, I need to do this to my body, I need to look older in order to like, make my own money and just like find a way out. And I think so, a lot of celebrities have talked about it. Like Cardi B at one point talked about it, and just like
Mm-hmm.
how it was like her way out and things like that. So I completely understand. Um, However, please do know that there's like support out there, and there's just like extra resources um, in order to maybe just go in a different direction if possible. But we do understand like that why certain people like go certain paths,
Yeah.
because life probably dealt them a certain card, and so like all these things come into play
Yeah.
in lifestyles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because human trafficking is like a real thing, and it's often tucked under the carpet. Like no one wants to talk about it. Some people don't believe it's not real. And that's the crazy thing is like people think it's a conspiracy theory, and I'm like, you really like there's been like raids of like people being like humanly like trafficked. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a real thing. It happens to a lot of young women and young men, and it's something that's not being spoken about. So like I'm glad that you brought that up, because some men and women may feel pressured to get these surgeries done because of it, or you never know what's going on. And the media is, I think they just do a really good job at selling us into that narrative that it's all about sex, and it's not. It really isn't. And so like if you go to my Instagram, I rarely post pictures of myself. I think I only have like one or three, I think like three pictures of myself on my Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people the reason why I do this is like because me myself, for having a large following, I'm a very private person. I don't really like to talk much about myself. I like to hear more about others. Not that I want to dig too much into others, but I'd rather add value than talk too much about myself, because you never know who's out there. Like, you never know who could potentially be out there that's wanting to hurt you. You never know.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. I mean, there's just crazy stuff that I've read that goes on online, and I'm like, I don't want like myself exposed out there, so I'd rather just post my content in the infographic way that I do it. And for being like a health account, that's not normal. That's not normal in the health and wellness field, for these health people to not post pictures of themselves. And I do it very limited by because of this fact, because I need that sense of privacy and security, knowing that I'm safe and that no
Yeah.
one's going to take my photos and Photoshop them and do crazy things. And like, I mean,
Yeah.
people are crazy. So that's a good point that you brought up.
No, I definitely try to. And I also like to bring awareness because at times you may not know what you're doing within your family. If you're raising like your children, let's say, and you're starting your own way of like doing things and lifestyles, and just being mindful that you're not grooming and raising someone who may potentially uh, be ending up in human trafficking, because at times it starts at home. Like if whatever you're perceiving as a woman, or let's say as a man, right, because we all have responsibility. If your father might maybe watching curvy or skinny women, and like you have this perception about sexuality, and like, oh, this is what men want, or just like women, your mom being like, hey, this is how I should look, like don't eat that because then you're gonna like blow up if you eat this, or like, so that's why I like to bring food into it, and also just like body perception and awareness about it, because you may not know. Not saying that you're going to turn into like this person who ends up down that path, but do be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of how you're grooming your children, and just like being mindful of like what you're spreading even to your family, or maybe your younger sister, or just like your cousin, or etc., like dropping little comments, or just like even gossiping as females, of being like, oh, did you see that, like we you're helping groom that route, you're paving that way and not knowing it, by like
Yeah.
also body shaming women.
Yeah, sometimes we have to just take the initiative to like talk about them, even if it's like uncomfortable. Even if it's uncomfortable, if people might not agree, and you just have to talk about it and be honest and open, because you never know, like if you're like if you're lighting the light bulb for someone, if you're turning it on for them and they're like, you're right, I never really noticed that. And they may linger and think about it throughout the day, and that can definitely push them in the right direction.
Yeah. So I do have to say, because of the times that we're in right now, are we shifting our perception of beauty now with the pandemic and having to quarantine? Or
Mm. What would you mean by like shifting our perceptions of beauty?
because now we're at home, right? We don't have to do our makeup. We don't really have to get dressed up to go out to eat. We don't really have to like put
Mm-hmm.
in as much. There's not as much social pressure of like having to, uh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
do that extra
I
work.
I would say that's a tough question. I think this looks different for everyone. That and I honestly, this is a topic that not many people are talking about, but I would say yes and no. Yes, because some people who used to like really overdress, like for work or for going out and meeting with friends now, are actually like taking a step back to be like, oh, you know what? Like, I don't want to really get ready, and I'd rather just like be in pajamas, right? I actually felt too overwhelmed by getting ready all the time that now I just want to like chill. And there's other people now who were like always chilling and wearing just, being casual, which is okay, and now they're like, oh my god, now I'm at home and like I don't have that social interaction anymore, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to feel good about something, so like I want to dress up. So some people might be going in like the opposite way.
Yeah.
Some people might be, and some people are starting to realize too that like it can feel really empowering to either dress up or to not dress up. And some people are getting very empowered by that. I'm seeing like a lot of articles that are trending around the topic of like how to get ready working from home, like how to look good while working from home,
Stop.
how to look good in a Zoom meeting. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
goodness.
and so it's becoming a real thing. I know for me,
Yeah.
I like to just be comfortable. Like whatever I'm wearing, I need to make sure it feels comfortable for me. And so, I mean, if I wanted to, I could wear a dress, and as long as it's comfortable, I'll wear it. But there's other people who like an edge, and even if it's uncomfortable, you know, they'll wear something as long as it's nice, just because they like to get that extra edge
Yeah.
on themselves. So I think the beauty perceptions are changing, and some people are taking a step back, and some people are going overboard. And this is going to look different for everyone.
I definitely have cut back on wardrobe. I thought I was already a minimalist, but come to find out, you could actually be more minimalist come the pandemic. And now I'm just like, uh, this is good for the winter, and it'll be like this amount of clothes. Like, I think this is good for like, and I was joking around with my sister, and I was telling her that I can hear my heels, calling me like, "Hey, girl, remember us?" like from my closet. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not even gonna remember how to walk in heels by the time if this pandemic ever ends. Like,
Yeah, dude, it's a real thing that people are just like they're kind of starting to fall into new habits. And some people, it may be hard for them back to fall back onto their old habits of dressing up when their job allows them to come back. So they may be stuck in getting undressed, and they're like, "Oh crap, I realized I dressed at one point. Like I dressed up, and now I have to like resort back to that."
yeah. I love this conversation, and I felt like we dropped so many gems. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, I'm so excited. And thank you so much. So I do before like we end and we just like what are our takeaways of like our overall conversation and like what are some steps that we can start doing to embrace holistic health?
Yeah, I think some of the takeaways is definitely like realize that like your body is built differently than everyone else's. It's
Facts.
gonna it's gonna take a while to realize what works for you. And you may have all of this information around you, but it's up to you to decide to apply it and maybe experiment a bit to see what works for you.
Facts.
If people don't do this, we may never realize in our lifetime what works for us. And so, if something intrigues you, I would say try it, see how it works, take notes. And if it doesn't work for you, like, then don't do it. People operate differently. We all have, I call our bodies like machines, like everyone's machine and like fuel and tank, like it looks completely different. And so just realize what's good for you. And I think a great way to like practice this is by kind of doing like slower living. And what I mean by like slower living is like take some time to reflect, to like rest, to promote like taking care of your body. And this is a
Facts.
practice of slow living, because so often people are just all about fast living, like I just want to live on the edge, I'm a multitasker, including myself.
Yeah.
um, Fast food, do this, get everything. We just want everything so fast that we're forgetting to like live slow, to just live slow and be in the moment. You don't have to be constantly on your phone. You don't have to like constantly like be in meetings. You can like just take a moment to be like, I just want to take this moment for myself. And when you give yourself those extra moments to just be by yourself and just reflect on what you really want, like there's a lot that can come out of it. There's a ton.
Nice. Yep. What Karina said. I'm like what Karina said. And where can we
Yeah.
find you, Karina? So that way
Yeah.
people know to go to lead.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. So it would be at atypical Latina. So atypical and then Atina. So you don't have to do double L. So you can find me on there often. I just joined the Clubhouse. I don't know if you've heard of it. Okay, I'll send you a link so you can join. But it's another networking app. I've really been liking it a lot, and I think I'm gonna be more on there. And then
Okay.
it's the same at Atypical Latina. And I once I start my YouTube channel, then I'll give it to you so you can link it up. I don't know yet when, so that's still up in the air. But those are, I think, the best two outlets to like reach out to me.
Awesome. Okay. And once we have them, hopefully I'll put them on the website so that way they can like
Yeah.
they can find you extra like resources. And then anything else that you may want to like add or just like drop for
I
or
think
just
the
like
last
resources.
I think the last thing really would be for like people to realize that we're like in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of a crazy year. So like if people are feeling stressed, like know that it's normal. It's not abnormal to not feel stressed, especially during these times. If people are having like hardships, like it's normal. And people are trying to normalize that it's not hard. I'm like, we are living in a hard time. And people
Yeah.
try to pretend in their head that everything is okay. But sometimes it's okay to sit back and be like, things aren't okay, but like,
Yeah.
what can I choose to make them okay at home for the most part?
Facts.
And so just really take a step back to reflect and to be in tune with the moment and take it easy. Like a lot of people are not taking it easy, and it's okay to just take it day by day because you never know. Things could change, things could happen. And yeah, I think that that would be my last thing.
Thank you so much, Karina. And that's a wrap on Mahogany Honey podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, or comment. And you can find us on, you can find me or find Karina, hopefully pretty soon on her YouTube channel. You can find me at the Mahogany Forum on YouTube, also Instagram on Mahogany Forum as well. And so thank you for listening in.
Thank you.